and learn about the different ways to justify the value criterion slash the standard. So if you remember from last time, the definition of ought, or the operative term in the resolution, usually told us what the value was, right?
Yep.
So establishing the value is almost always a very straightforward process. It's just a question of what ought means.
Okay.
However, establishing the value criterion is significantly more complicated. So the example you gave me at the beginning of our session today about explaining what the value criterion relation is, you said, let's suppose the value is morality and the value criterion is maximizing happiness. What that would mean then is that the best way to be moral is to maximize happiness.
Okay.
Now, in terms of the big picture, that makes 100% sense, right? But in terms of the details, how do we go about justifying that what is moral is what maximizes happiness? So that is going to be the topic of today's lecture. How do we justify the value criterion? Now, the big picture here is that you could justify the value criterion by saying, because I said so, right? So you could say, the value is morality, the value criterion is maximizing life because I said so. Contention 1 is blah, 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 blah. Contention 2 is blah, 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 blah. Now, why would that not work?
Because you're not giving warrants for why it's true.
Good, exactly, right?
Warranted.
Exactly. So we talked about claim, warrant, impact. You gave the claim that the value criterion is maximizing life, and the impact is that whoever maximizes most life wins the round, but there is no warrant. So what that means then is that in debate, it is not sufficient to say, because I said so. You have to give a reason why it is true. So because I said so is not a good enough reason, because it's an appeal to authority, and those don't fly in debate. We need to construct actually valid reasons. Now, I think one feature of reason that is pretty universally agreed upon is that reasons should be non-arbitrary. Because if they're arbitrary, it goes right back to the original problem of because I said so.
Yeah.
The reason we don't think because I said so is a persuasive argument is because that argument is arbitrary. One person will stand up and say, because I said so, X is true, and another person will stand up and say, because I said so, Y is true. And there's no way to resolve that debate. So what we're focused on is constructing valid reasons that are objective. That's important. The opposite of arbitrariness is usually considered to be objectivity. So we don't want arbitrary reasons, we want objective ones. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next 25 to 35 minutes discussing different ways we can set up objective reasons for value criterions.
Okay.
We're going to operate underneath the assumption that the value criterion is justifying some sort of normative theory. Now, remember how we talked about in the last lecture that debate has a lot of jargon, and the example I gave you was about biology?
Yep.
Normativity is another example of that jargon. Normativity is usually synonymous with morality. Morality explains to us what we should do. Normativity also explains to us what we should do. Normativity is the study of how we ought to act, or how it would be most moral to proceed. So, don't get confused by my jargon. If I flip-flop between this establishes normativity and this establishes morality, I'm usually saying the same thing. They're synonymous. Make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So how do we justify morality? We've already established because I said so is not good enough. The other really big way we could justify morality is aside from reasoning, is through emotions. So as opposed to an appeal to authority or an appeal to reasoning, we could say, because I feel so. Usually, and this is a caveat that you have to note, that the word is usually, not always. Usually, emotional appeals are not sufficient in debate either.
Okay.
So you cannot say the value criterion is maximizing happiness because I feel like that's the right one.
Mm-hmm.
Or because if that's not the value criterion, I'm going to cry.
Yep.
Those are not good enough of reasons. Now, the reason I told you that the caveat here is usually is because there is an entire theory of normativity called emotivism, which says that the reasons that justify our actions are emotional. So the best way to achieve morality is to stay in line with our emotions.
Okay.
So notice how debate is really open-ended, right? Just because emotions in a nutshell are not sufficient to justify the value criterion does not mean that the value criterion can't use emotions to decide the winner of the debate.
Okay.
So here's how emotivism would work, just to clarify this example. If the value criterion or the standard is being consistent with our emotivist feelings, or staying consistent with emotivism, or whatever way you want to phrase it, if that's the value criterion, what that would mean is that the winner of the debate round is whoever is most consistent with what people desire and feel, or what their emotions are. So in the context of this particular September-October debate topic about adolescents deciding whether or not they want to make medical, or whether they ought to be able to make medical decisions, you would do some sort of survey or some sort of statistical study analyzing how adolescents feel if they do or do not get the right to make autonomous medical decisions.
Okay.
This all makes sense, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so from here on forth, we're going to leave aside appeals to authority and emotional justifications, and we're going to focus on reasons. So I have sort of created a big picture cheat sheet for you, and the big picture cheat sheet is that there are 6 different predominant ways that people in LD debate go about justifying the value criterion. Let me know when you're ready for them.
Okay. I'm ready.
First is actor specificity. Second is meta-ethics. Third is epistemology. Fourth is ontology. Fifth is theory. And sixth is skepticism. So usually, most justifications for the value criterion in contemporary LD debate will appeal to one of these 6 big picture reasons to prefer the value criterion. Now, obviously, this is, not comprehensive. There will be a 7th and an 8th and a 9th. But this is, in my experience, the most popular ways people will go about justifying the value criterion.
Okay.
So this will account for almost 90 to 95% of cases that you encounter. Additionally, by the end of this lecture, if you did your homework assignment correctly about going through the cases, you'll be able to pinpoint which justifications in each of the cases apply to which one of these big picture criterias.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So another way to think about these criterias is that they are framing issues on the standards debate. So we need to frame what the standard is, or we need some sort of meta standard for the standard, right? These are all synonyms: meta standard, framing issues, big picture criteria, etc. Those are all the same way to say the same thing, which is that we need some sort of objective method to decide what the standard is.
Sure.
And so these are several different objective methods in which you can conclude that the standard is X as opposed to Y, that the standard is staying consistent with the principles of practical reasoning as opposed to maximizing happiness, or the standard is staying consistent with principles of reasonable rejection as opposed to staying consistent with practical reasoning. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So part one of this lecture will be to go through all 6 of those different big picture criteria, explain to you how they work, give you places you can explore the details of all of these, and then part 2 of this lecture will be to give you a breakdown of some of the most popular frameworks in LD and how they're most popularly justified when using these 6 big picture criteria.
Okay.
So, before we begin, I want to give you a quick reminder about the importance of framework debate. Framework debate is crucial because it tells the judge how to decide the winner. You would understandably be very upset if the judge just flipped a coin and was like, I vote for the negative, or the judge was like, I think the negative is more attractive, so I vote neg, or if the judge was like, I like the AF tie better, so I vote AF, right? That would not make you very happy, hopefully. And so the judge needs an objective way to decide the winner. And so the way that judges use objectivity in debate rounds, especially for the substantive debate, i.e. the value criterion offense, the substantive debate is decided via who has most offense back to the standard. So notice now, again, more jargon is being thrown at you. Substantive debate. You might ask, what's the difference between other types of debate and substantive debate? Well, there's substantive debate, there's theory debate, there's critique debate, there's pre-fiat performance debate, right? And so all of those are different types of debate. Right now we were talking about the most popular type of debate and the type of debate that every 1AC almost always engages in, which is substantive debate.
Okay.
Cool. So this is crucial because it tells the judge how they evaluate the winner of the round. The other thing I want to remind you is that the winner of the framework does not win the debate. The winner of the framework does not win the debate. You can win the framework and lose the round. In fact, a lot of debaters do win the framework but lose the debate because the framework just explains what the filtering mechanism for offense is.
Okay.
Filtering mechanism, yet another jargon word thrown at you, right?
Yeah.
Notice how all this jargon, debaters love jargon, but the jargon ultimately all conceptually means the same thing. You just need to get comfortable with it.
Okay.
Cool. So the filtering mechanism is going to be important because it tells the judge how they decide who wins, but it doesn't tell the judge who wins. So after you win the framework, you still need to win offense back to that framework. Now, this has also the last really big implication before we delve into the actual details of the lecture. The other really big implication here is that sometimes it is strategic for you to concede that you are losing the framework debate.
Sure.
In a world where your opponent has more offense to your framework, but you have more offense to your opponent's framework, would you not want to just concede the framework? Yes, right?
Yeah.
So that's important. Do not be committed to your framework. If it's strategic to win, win it. But if it's strategic to concede that you're losing it, then just lose it.
Okay.
Cool. So let's delve into the 6 ways or 6 meta standards that we can use to justify the standard. The first one is actor specificity. It's not first because it's most important. It's just first because that's how I decided to teach it right now.
Okay.
Cool. So if I go down the street and I kill someone, we usually consider that murder, yeah?
Yeah.
If a surgeon is performing a surgery and messes up, do we consider that murder?
No.
If a soldier is in combat and kills an enemy combatant, do we consider that murder?
No.
Okay, so the difference between me killing someone and the surgeon killing somebody and the soldier killing somebody was that we were different actors.
Okay.
So who you are influences what your responsibilities are. Who you are and the hat that you wear and the role that you play should impact normatively what you should do. This should make a ton of sense, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, now this is important because resolutions do not happen in a vacuum. resolutions happen with some actor, right? Now,
Sure.
predominantly the actor of the resolution is the government.
Okay.
That is not always the case, though. So when we say actor, let's take this resolution at hand. Adolescents ought to be given or ought to have the autonomous right to make medical choices, right?
Yeah.
It is tempting to say that the actor in the resolution is adolescents. And
Yeah.
that is a, I guess, potentially defensible interpretation. However, adolescents will not give themselves the autonomous right to make medical choices, right?
Yeah.
If they could give themselves the autonomous right to make medical choices, we wouldn't be discussing the resolution. It would have already happened by now.
Yeah.
So somebody has to give adolescents the autonomous right to make medical decisions.
Okay.
Now, that somebody is usually a government. It doesn't have to be, right? Like, that somebody could be the, like, National Rifles Association if we decided to give that organization the power to do so.
Sure.
However, we've decided that the NRA is not responsible for whether or not adolescents get to make medical decisions. So it would be highly inaccurate to say that the NRA is the actor of the resolution.
Yeah.
So it would be probably more appropriate to say that the actor of the resolution is the government, because the government can pass a law or a policy which indicates that there is some change to the status quo, i.e. what is currently happening, and that change is in favor of the affirmative, i.e. that adolescents are now autonomously given the right to make their own medical choices.
Sure.
Cool. So this is important because then that indicates that adolescents are the subjects, not the actors of the resolution.
Okay.
They are the recipient of the action. They are not the actors that take the action.
Okay.
So do you see how interpreting the actor as adolescents may potentially not be legitimate?
Yeah.
Awesome. So here's how actor specificity works. The argument is that normativity is actor specific, that what you ought to do depends on who you are. So if you are a government, your obligations and moral obligations and ethical codes are different than if you are a normal human being or a citizen or some sort of individual. The
Right.
argument is that the government is a collective identity. What distinguishes governments from individuals is that governments have no like ephemeral quality, right? You can't shoot the government, you can't stab the government, you can't kill the government. The government is not a person, it is an entity.
Okay.
And this is probably true for several different reasons. I think a great example is that governments are comprised of numerous people, right? So President Obama is his own person, and he has obligations as an individual, as a father to his daughters, and as a husband to his wife. But he also has obligations to the government as the president. Right? So it would not be fair to say that governments are just comprised of individuals, because those individuals play a completely different role in a world where they are, in a world where they, yo, Jack, where'd you go? For those of you following along at home, 1 second, sorry, I'm gonna pause this and bring my student back, technical difficulties. So, for those of you following along at home, sorry about the technical difficulty. So, if my recollection serves me right, we were talking about the differences between a government and an individual, right, Jack?
Yep.
So, the example I was giving you was about President Obama, how Obama has obligations to his children as a father and obligations to his wife as a husband, but he also has obligations to literally the entire citizenry of the United States as the president,
Sure.
right? And so I don't think it would be fair to say that Obama or the government is just comprised of individuals and we can just use their individual obligations to judge what the government's obligations are. Because that wouldn't make any sense. The government doesn't have an obligation to be a good husband to Michelle Obama.
Sure.
Right? The government is not involved in Obama's personal affairs.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's all important. Because that indicates that because governments are different from individuals, your ethical theory needs to be sensitive, or rather, sensitive is a good word actually. It needs to be sensitive to the roles of the government.
Okay.
So let's talk about what governments are expected to do ethically. Do you have any hunches?
Maybe protect the basic rights of its citizens.
Okay, that's probably a good one. Governments should probably protect their people, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is interesting, right? Because there is such a thing as overprotecting people. Do you agree?
Yeah.
So, if the government put everyone in boxes and fed them 3 meals a day, it would probably obliterate crime in the span of like overnight, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think people would be very happy if they were just living in boxes all day and just waiting for their next meals to come.
Okay.
So that's clearly an instance in which the government would be overprotecting its people.
Yeah.
So the government needs to protect its people, but it needs to basically just provide the basic rights as opposed to every single possible right ever.
Sure.
Okay, this is all super important because a lot of ethical theories will say that consequences are not important.
Yeah.
However, if the government needs to protect its people, then it probably needs to pay attention to the consequences of its policies.
Sure.
Right? So when you take an action, there's two portions to that action traditionally. One is the intention behind the action, and then second is the end result of that action.
Okay.
The end result is also often synonymously referred to as state of affairs.
Okay.
So you can see why the action was taken and what the action has done or resulted in.
Sure.
A lot of ethical theories will say that the only thing that is important is the intentions behind actions.
Okay.
So, do you see how you could use actor specificity to take out those ethical theories?
Yeah.
Because an ethical theory that says only intentionality matters probably isn't being sensitive to the obligations of a government.
Okay.
So, the actor in the resolution couldn't possibly implement the ethical theory that your opponent is proposing.
Sure.
So, we've gone from the big picture of because I said so, or if you don't agree with me, I'd cry, to the actual realm of reasoning. And so this is the first big picture reason that we've encountered, actor specificity.
Yeah.
I want to take a step back and ask if you have any questions or concerns or hesitation, if this is all something you're following so far.
Yeah. Actor specificity makes sense so far.
Cool. Okay. So that's actually actor specificity. It's actually as simple as that. Now, one caveat I do need to tell you is that there are a ton of people who disagree with me and think that governments can be focused on intentions and governments can be means-based, right? And so you have to remember that everything I'm saying is not capital T true. That everything I'm saying is up for debate and that people do debate it. Does that make sense? Jack?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you cut out for a second or did you hear what I said?
No, I didn't hear the last thing you said.
Okay. I told you that you have to remember that everything I'm saying is up for debate. That a lot of people do think that governments can only focus on intentions, that they don't have to focus on consequences. So it is not the case that what I'm saying is capital T true.
Okay.
You still have to defend it and beat back the arguments that say that I am wrong.
Sure.
Make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So the next big picture way we can justify a framework that I want to talk about is called meta-ethics.
Okay.
So meta-ethics seeks to establish a starting point for morality that is non-arbitrary and objective. So meta-ethics seeks to discover the constitutive nature of morality, the one thing that morality is indispensable without.
Okay.
So an example of meta-ethics would be like your ethical starting point could be actually that would be epistemology. The most popular example of metaethics would be practical reasoning. So there are a whole line of philosophers in the Kantian tradition, starting with this old German dude, I believe. His name was Immanuel Kant, who proposed that the very essence of morality is reasoning, and that reasoning needs to be consistent and universalizable.
Okay.
And so the argument here would be that the one intrinsic nature to morality is universalizability, that all principles of morality must be universalizable. Now, what do I mean by universalizable? A great way to explain universalizability in the form of an example is the golden rule.
Okay.
What does the golden rule say?
That you want to treat others as you want to be treated.
Exactly. So the actions you should take are actions you want to be taken against you.
Okay.
So the reason presumably murder would not be universalizable, according to Kant, is because you wouldn't want to get murdered.
Sure.
Right? And that would be the same reason that lying is not universalizable, and that cheating is not universalizable, and that crime is not universalizable.
Okay.
So that's the starting point for morality, is that actions that are taken must be, you must take actions that you would like taken against you.
Okay.
So that's an example of a meta-ethic, i.e. practical reasoning, specifically in the form of universalizability, that you could use to establish a principle of morality.
Sure.
Now, this principle does not imply a certain ethical theory. Once you've established the meta-ethic, you still have to establish what the ethic is. So the meta-ethic just explains how we filter out which ethical theories make the cut.
Okay.
So it says, look, judge, you have to decide between 15 different ethical theories, and this is one principle that you must absolutely use to filter out ethical theories. So once you use this principle to filter out ethical theories, perhaps you come to the conclusion that there are only 3 ethical theories left.
Okay.
And then out of those 3 ethical theories, we would have a debate as to which one is the most appropriate or correct.
Sure.
So winning the meta-ethic doesn't win you the ethical theory. Winning the meta-ethic just excludes other ethics, presumably your opponents.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, a couple of words of advice here. One is that I am notoriously awful at this debate. I,
Okay.
even after 8 years, just do not really understand what a lot of these arguments say, and a lot of them just don't make any sense to me, even though I've heard them over and over and over again. So this is one area in which I won't be able to advise and teach you as well as I would like to be able to.
Okay.
So fear not, though, because obviously my students have been very successful, as was I. So it's not like understanding metaethics is an absolute necessity to being good at LD debate.
Sure.
Now, that being said, it is really useful to be good at metaethics because it's a pretty huge portion of framework debate.
Yeah.
So what I will do is I will lead you in directions where you can get good at that debate, and I will set you up with people who can help you with that debate, and I will basically tell you how you can do it, but I won't be able to do it for you.
Okay.
Cool. And this debate, as well as epistemology and ontology, are basically the 3 main portions of debate that I just do not feel very comfortable with. And that lack of comfort is a result of me not doing a lot of the philosophical reading. I find a lot of the philosophical literature, quite frankly, to be boring and to be really dense. And so I haven't done a lot of that reading, which doesn't put me in a good position to teach it.
Okay.
However, there are debaters who have done the reading and are in a fantastic position to teach it, and there's a lot of resources available online for free that will help you learn this debate.
Okay.
Cool. So do you understand in the big picture what metaethics does and why it is important? Hello? Okay, so for those of you following along at home, sorry again, we had a little bit of technical difficulties. So, meta-ethics. Are we on the same page as to the importance of it and how it is set up?
Yeah, just how it filters out ethical theories.
Exactly. It establishes an objective starting point for ethics.
Okay.
Okay, so uh, I'm going to cut it off here because I want to do justice to rest of the explanations and the different big picture filtering mechanisms. So we'll just call this part 1 of the framework lecture, and part 2 of the framework lecture will be the other 4 big picture ways to set up a framework, and then in-depth analysis and overview of all the different frameworks in debate. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.